Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm just going to add in Instagram here. We're going to go live on Instagram like we have been, as well as YouTube. There we go. All right. How is it going tonight, guys? Looking forward to chatting with all of you. See what's going on in the fall fishing world. I got some fun stuff to announce tonight, too. So I think we're going to have a couple guests coming on also. Hey, Lane, Wisconsin Anglers, how you guys doing? Yeah, a bunch of people. Cool. So as you guys are hopping on, let me know where you've been fishing. If you've been fishing this fall, I know Wisconsin Anglers, I know you guys have been fishing. I've seen some of your salmon escapades popping up here and there. Yeah, long time no see. Haven't talked to you for a while. It looks like the Michigan salmon season has been one of the best, from what I've heard, that a lot of people have ever seen. So let me turn this light up just a little bit. That's down. That's off. There we go. Yeah, I think Blake might hop on tonight, and I think Dax is going to show up here too, hopefully. But yeah, let me know where you guys have been fishing. It's kind of a weird time of year. I never used to fish in the fall, but the last couple of years I've been doing a lot more fishing in the fall, and it's some of the best fishing of the year, really. Especially for trout and salmon, that whole thing. Today I was out fishing for browns and brook trout on a little inland stream, and the fishing was really good, except kind of like I talked about last week. One of you guys asked me about fall fishing for inland trout. It was really, really low and really, really clear. We haven't had any rain to speak of here in probably a month. And both the inland streams and basically the tributaries flowing into Lake Superior are really, really low and really, really clear. So the fishing is extremely difficult right now as far as getting fish to bite and not spooking fish. I mean, you almost have to fish early in the morning, or at some point, in the evening when there's low light, or even at night. I know some guys are fishing at night too. But let me know if you guys have ever night fished for inland trout. I know a lot of guys do it. I have not, actually. Hey, Ray, Tiffany, how you doing? Have you been chasing salmon at all, Ray? I'm curious to know if you go down there and fish the actual salmon run, or if you just fish them trolling. I know you guys troll down there, but and you guys on YouTube, let me know too what you've been into. If you've been fishing at all, drop a comment either now in the chat, or if you're seeing this later. I'd love to know what guys find in the fall, as far as opportunities, because there's a lot of opportunities in the fall. And like I said, I'm sort of new to fall fishing. I've only been doing it a couple of years, so let me know. Okay, so Ray, you stop in September. So Ray, are you fishing now, or are you hunting? I'm curious to know. A lot of guys just switch to hunting. That's what I used to do, and I still hunt some, but Jim says live fall salmon fishing in the rivers. That's cool. I'm assuming you're down in Lake Michigan, maybe. Was just up fishing the tributaries for steelhead. It's low, but the fishing was awesome. 9 steelhead in 2 days. David, is that Lake Superior tributaries or Lake Michigan tributaries? I'm curious to know which ones those are. Okay, so Ray says fall for him is muskie and whitetail. Yeah, a lot of guys chase muskies too. I mean, that's really common. I just don't have time to chase muskies in the fall. I've got too much other stuff going on, and they waste too much of my time. I'm not that good of a muskie fisherman, but once in a while I'll go. I went last week and didn't see any fish, but I didn't fish that long either. White River. Is that the White River that goes into Lake Superior? Okay. Nice. Yeah, I was on the Brule last week, last Friday, and it was really rough going. I did not catch any lake run fish, but I caught a lot of little baby fish up to 14 inches, but super low again and super clear. Andy Schuette's been working. Yeah, and not the fun kind of working. back to working on cars. Otherwise, he guides. And guiding is the fun kind of working, I'm assuming that you're talking about, Andy. Muskegon. Okay, that's UP. Yeah, I'd love to get up in the UP sometime and chase steelhead and salmon. And I'd really like to get the boat up there, actually, and troll some more on the UP. Yeah, the Brule has been really, really tough for a lot of guys, I think, from what I've heard. I heard the mouth of the Brule is like basically sanded in, so it's only a few inches deep. That happens sometimes when you don't get rain for a long time. It's got a really wide mouth and the water spreads out a lot, and the wave action kind of piles the sand up and it gets really shallow. And sometimes the fish don't want to cross that barrier. So we need some rain. I know we got a little bit, but I don't know if it's enough to raise the river at all. It might help a little bit, push some more fish into the river. But David Lundeen says, if you're fly fishing, ditch the bobber and just tight line. Yeah, David, I tight line with spinning tackle. So I'm basically doing the exact same thing you're doing if you're tight lining with a fly rod, but I'm doing it with a 9.5 foot spinning rod. So the White River, Andy said, did you say a person's fishing the White River up by me? No, I think, let's see, Jim Newmandor, White River. Yeah, I guess I don't know if it's the White River up by you or not. He said he's salmon fishing, so I'm not sure if there's salmon in that white. But yeah, that's how I steelhead fish. I pretty much in the spring and the fall, I run either yarn flies or stone fly imitations on spinning gear on a long rod, and I tight line. I very rarely float fish. A lot of guys do and have good luck with it, but I'm not a big float guy. I like to drift and tight line, and I like to feel that bite, and I'd like to swing those flies through the holes. And it seems like right as you get past straight across the river, as you're starting to swing through the tail, that's kind of when I tend to get bit. So how's the duck hunting been this year? It's been good when I got out. I've been out only twice. Well, we jumped a pond with my son. My son's 9 and he's starting to shoot now. So we jumped a pond and he got a really nice wood duck with me. But as far as decoy hunting, we on opening day, I think we got 12 birds for 3 guys. And then I took my son out last week and we limited out. We got 12. And that was his first duck hunt. So he was pretty stoked. He had never shot ducks before at all. And I let a flock of teal land for him. And he shot 2 with 1 shot. So he was pretty stoked to get his first 2 ducks in 1 shot. But yeah, it's been okay. This weather's definitely pushing some birds down. So there's no doubt about that. David Lundeen, I'm curious to know if you fly fish and spinning fish or just fly fish and tight line. There's a lot of ways to catch steelhead. There's a lot of ways to catch steelhead and browns, cohos. Some guys I know, they basically just fish spinners, and that's all they fish in the fall. And they catch big steelhead on them. They catch cohos on them. They catch browns on them. And, I've tried spinners, but I haven't had a ton of luck with spinners. It's been okay for me. I've caught a few fish, a few cohos. I actually had a giant steelhead whack a spinner one time, and I didn't hook it, but I saw it. And it was one of the biggest steelhead I've ever seen in the Brule. But Yeah, I don't know. Last Friday I fished everything. I fished spinners, I fished flies, I fished live bait, I fished, yarn, pretty much everything you can think of, and I just could not come up with a lake run fish. Fished a lot of good water too. Covered a lot of good holes, a lot of good runs, but it was not happening. But today I fished a really cool inland trout spot. It was kind of the headwaters of a bigger river, and the browns had moved up there to spawn from all these lower stretches, and it kind of concentrates them this time of year. There's only 2 days left of our trout season, but they were colored up and they were finicky. I mean, you could barely approach the water. Like, you had to sneak up to the edge of the water, and even then they were seeing me, and I saw some giant browns, like some 20+ inch browns, and there was just no way to get near them. I caught a couple nice fish, but there was a ton of fish in there. It was really, really tricky to fish. You could see the bottom everywhere in the creek, and they were there, but they were finicky. I think that's a spot a guy could fish at night and maybe have better luck. But what kind of water do you usually hunt? Lakes, rivers, ponds? All the above, but most of our duck hunting is done in places we can only get a canoe. So I don't tend to hunt a lot of spots that boats can get to, just because they get pounded to death. And we hunt a lot of little backwoods lakes. We hunt spots on the river, that are hard to get to because there's shallow water on either side of them. And then we hunt lots of ponds and little, runoff areas, spring ponds that you have to drag a canoe off a road or something, or down a big hill, or spots that kind of tend to keep people out is where I tend to duck hunt. It does not take ducks long to leave an area if they're being bothered. I mean, one hunt sometimes can completely ruin a spot. And if somebody hunts it the day before you hunt it, it might be over for you. So secret spots, that's kind of that's the goal. Find secret spots, and we do a lot of scouting. I have 2 buddies that I duck hunt with, and between the 3 of us, we put on a lot of miles every fall looking for ducks. Me, not so much this year. I haven't done as much scouting, but we've got a 1-year-old, and life's crazy right now. So do you ever fish with trout magnets? No. I think I know what the trout magnet is. I think it's a spoon of sorts, if I remember right. Let me know exactly what it is. Is it like one of those kind of funky shaped spoons that are shaped like a U? If I remember right, I think that's what it is. I don't typically when I'm fishing inland trout. Well, today it was like live bait only. I mean, that is the only way you were going to get any fish. Like, you cast a spinner or any kind of like bigger, artificial in there, and the fish were gone. So I had to throw unweighted crawlers or even little red worms and just let them slowly drift down through the current. That was the only way I was catching fish today. But when I'm fishing artificials for trout, I typically am using, I really like to use those little Eurotackle B-Vibes, those little 2-inch swim baits on like a 16th or 32nd ounce jig. Those have been killer for me for stream trout. And then I also like to fish little stick baits, like little Rapalas or the Eurotackle Z-Spenders. Those are really good. And then I do fish spinners some too, but I don't fish a ton of spoons for trout. It just kind of, I probably should, but it's just not how I fish usually. How about the rest of you guys? What's your favorite artificial lure for stream trout? I'd like to know. I found I can catch them on quite a few different lures, and it's kind of fun to try new stuff and see what works. And that's kind of how I found those B-Vibes. I was using them for crappies and perch, and they were working really well. And A buddy of mine had been using them for trout, and he said, "Man, you got to try these things for trout." And I was like, "Well, I'll give it a try. I'm not afraid to try. I've thrown big swim baits for everything else, and everything seems to eat them." So, but yeah, I started throwing those for trout. I probably caught more trout on those little B-Vibe swim baits in the last couple of years than anything else. Gold Panther Martin spinner, no hair or colors, just gold. Yeah, well, you're on the same track as me with the spinners, man. Like, I hate throwing spinners with a bunch of stuff on them for trout. The plain, more plain, the better, in my opinion. Even on those spinners, they're like 3s and 4s, and they have that little red piece of tubing on the hook. I'll cut that off of almost every trout spinner I have, just because I don't want that extra color on there. I want just as plain Jane as can be, and I never throw any dressing or anything like that for trout. Black and gold Panther Martin we got from Victor. Yep, that's classic. Chris Hagness says the Sex Dungeon, which he's a fly guy, and that is a 5-inch black articulated streamer. Yep. Woolly Bugger. Yeah, Woolly Bugger's classic. Woolly Bugger's classic, and little hair jigs too. If you're not a fly guy, work pretty well. I just haven't fished with them much, but I do know a couple guys who use them quite a bit. Rooster tail, yep, rooster tail's a old standby too. I'm more of a MEPS guy when it comes to spinners. I haven't thrown much rooster tail or Panther Martins. My dad always told me basically use Panther Martins for brook trout and MEPS for other trout. So I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's kind of what he told me. So I kind of stuck by it. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, anybody else trout fishing this time of year? When it comes to steelhead, Great Lakes fish, I'm definitely more of a drifting flies kind of guy, tight lining, especially yarn. Yarn's kind of my go-to when it comes to Goose Lake. What's the topic? Topic right now, we're kind of talking trout fishing. So both inland and Great Lakes tributary fishing. Kind of been talking lures. So what's your favorite lure to fish for trout? So let us know. We've only got a couple more days of trout fishing in the inland streams up here. That goes to the 15th. So I think Saturday is the last day for that, and then some of the tributaries go to November 15th. So there's still quite a bit of time for that. Looks like my YouTube stream kind of conked out on me for some reason, but that's why I went LTE for my Instagram stream here. The KO Wobbler. Yep. Straight Chicago harbor fishing. Okay. So in Chicago harbors down there, are you catching a lot of cohos or kings or steelhead or what? I mean, I've heard that there's a lot of cohos down there in Chicago area. I have a buddy who used to live down there, and he used to cast for cohos off the harbor walls and whatnot, the break walls. He said it used to be pretty awesome back in the day. Stoneflies for steelhead. But I think a dead drift presentation is really the most important factor. Yeah. Steelhead love stoneflies. There's no doubt about it. So do browns. They love them. Caught a lot of fish on those too. Racine and Kenosha Harbor for steelhead and browns. Use square bill crankbaits and replace the back treble with a Howie fly. Oh, interesting. Huh. I have never thought of that. That's pretty cool. Power lining it for them in spring. Okay. Kings. So you have a spring coho run in Chicago. That's interesting. Huh. I did not know that. Most places I've heard of only have coho run in the fall. Are the cohos running, like actually running to spawn, or are they just coming in there to feed in the spring? They must be, huh? That's interesting. Do I have a preference in color for the bee vibes? Yeah. Gold is my number one go-to, and then black blue flake is my secondary color for the bee vibes. That's kind of been my top two. And I used to only fish gold, but I actually had a bunch of fish in a hole. They were all rising one morning, and I could tell there was a couple big fish there, and I was throwing the gold bee vibe, and they wouldn't hit it. And so I switched to black, and on the first cast, just got smoked by a 20-inch brown. And ever since then, I've kind of been altering back and forth between black and gold, just because obviously they like the black too, and some days they want the black, sometimes they want the gold. So that's kind of what I've been doing. It's been working. That's interesting. I like to hear all these ideas. I've never thought of replacing the back hook of a crankbait with a Howie fly. Are you talking like the full size, like 4-inch, like the 4-inch Howie fly that's like long with the big treble, or are you talking like a peanut fly? I would think that big Howie fly would be a little bit deadening on the action, but I can see how a peanut fly would work pretty well. And do you put that right tight to the crankbait? I'm curious if you put that right up to the crankbait, or if you're like running it off the back of the crankbait, kind of like you would off of a flasher. Okay, yeah, the peanut fly. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, and is that like a foot back from the crank, or is it like right on the split ring? Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard of guys throwing those big square bill cranks down there for a trout, and like no one up here would ever throw a square bill crank for a trout. I don't think that I know. They just wouldn't hit it. The trout up here are way more finicky than the trout and salmon you guys have down there in the Michigan tribs and harbors. It seems like, but on the same time, we do troll like stick baits and stuff for them, and they'll hit those. So I'm actually hoping to go try some of that late season trolling here on Lake Superior, maybe in a week or two, hopefully, if I have time. It can be really good for the browns. Tend to move in later in the fall, like around this time of year, and as the water temps drop into the 40s, they move up real shallow, and you can troll for them right off the bank pretty much. And lake trout should be moving shallow too right now. You can only fish Lakers over on the UP right now, but that's not that far from me. I can actually get there in about 2 hours, and I've thought about trying to go try the shallow lake trout too. Any of you guys ever troll late fall? I'm curious, like into November, on any of the Great Lakes. Am I catching chubs or shiners while inland trout fishing? Sometimes. Usually, if I'm catching chubs and shiners, I know I'm probably not in the right place, especially in the fall. In the summertime, if I'm fishing live bait, you yeah, then you'll catch chubs and shiners in the same hole as trout. But in the fall time, it seems like the trout are so stacked up in areas this time of year that there's not a minnow to be found in that in that area. Like the trout are just gonna eat them. They're not gonna be in the same areas most of the time. But in the summer, you do see them mixing more. It seems like, and sometimes you'll catch a big chub like a 10-inch chub or something mixed in with trout just because he knows he's not going to get eaten by the trout. But trout are just vicious. I mean, they eat the minnows. Any minnows around, if you're in a heavily populated trout stream, there just isn't a lot of minnows typically because they're just getting chomped by the trout. I mean, especially big browns, they love minnows. Speaking of that, live bait. What's your favorite live bait for trout? Or do you use live bait for trout? I've moved away from live bait for trout quite a bit the past couple of years. But like I said, like today, when the water was super low, super clear, there's just no way to catch them without live bait. I mean, they're so finicky and so spooky. Anything big splashing down, they just freaked. But a lot of the streams that I've fished the last couple of years, either I'm fishing them in the early trout season, so you can't use live bait. Some of them actually are closed to live bait. Some of the sections I fish now all year, so they don't even allow live bait at all. And then I've just found myself kind of experimenting with different artificials and stuff, and it's been pretty rewarding. So I've kind of moved away from live bait a lot, although I still will use it. Crawlers if they're not eating spinners or flies, and then small crawlers. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's pretty hard to beat a crawler for trout. It's just one of the classic. It's like peanut butter and jelly. I mean, trout love crawlers and worms, especially inland trout. And there's a reason inland trout like crawlers and worms. That's because they eat them naturally all the time. When the water raises in some of those streams, you get a big runoff and it just washes all kinds of night crawlers and worms into the river, and they're so used to eating them and gorging on them that it's just pretty hard for them not to chomp one as it's going by. I remember one time on a trout stream I fished, we had just gotten a big rain like the night before, and I had some time to fish, so I went down there, and you could literally see night crawlers and worms floating by in the river, like hundreds of them. And of course, the trout were all full, and it was absolutely worthless fishing. But it was pretty cool to see. I didn't realize that many would get washed into the river in a rain like that. But yeah, I'm sure they ate all they could eat, and they were just packed full, and they couldn't eat another bite. But I have used minnows in a couple occasions, for big browns and also brook trout. If you want to single out like the bigger brook trout in a hole, sometimes in a hole there'll be so many brook trout, like tons and tons of little ones, and you start throwing crawlers in there, or like you said, chubs. If there's chubs and shiners around, they just won't make it through the little guys. So in those cases, I have actually thrown crappie minnows or fatheads, and that tends to single out the bigger trout. And the minnows don't bother them usually. I've caught a couple big chubs on crappie minnows, but not too many. And usually they don't even bother them. So if you get a bite, it's probably a bigger fish. What's the weirdest thing you've caught a trout on? I'll tell you mine. One time I was fishing in a spot that just was absolutely loaded with brook trout, and there was like 30 brookies in each one of these holes that I was running up on, and I saw a frog hopping along the bank, and I grabbed it, and it was a pretty decent sized leopard frog. Like if you stretch it out, it was probably 5 inches long. and I tossed that thing into the first hole, and it started to dive, and all of a sudden just got T-boned by like a 14-inch brook trout. So that's the only brook trout I've ever caught on a frog, but it only took about 3 seconds for that thing to get hit. So brookies they're really aggressive. You know, they'll eat just about anything that moves on certain days. And sometimes, you know, finicky trout, you throw something big and juicy in front of them, and even though they're used to sipping little tiny insects, they'll just attack it out of sheer aggression. If you see a heron or crane on a creek, do you fish it or keep moving? Interesting. I guess if it looks like it's fishing ahead of me and kind of moving ahead of me on the river, I suppose I'd go around it. You know, I wouldn't go fishing right behind it necessarily. That could be an indication that maybe it spooked some fish. Yeah, like even today, I had just the best looking hole of the whole entire stretch, and I started sneaking up to it, and a big fat muskrat was sitting right under the grass, and it just panicked and jumped into the river, swam right through the hole that I wanted to fish, and completely ruined it. So that can happen too. Man, that was bad. There was a couple big fish in that hole too. I saw them. As soon as he jumped in, they spooked and swam upriver. But that's a good question. Yeah. Have you guys ever seen trout eating mice? I know a lot of guys throw mouse patterns at night for big browns, and I've never actually done that. I've never fly fished that way, but I did catch a brown one time. It was like a 17-inch brown that I kept, and I cut it open when I filleted it, and it had an actual mouse in its stomach. So I know they eat them, probably more than we even realize. You know, a lot of these brown trout streams wind their way through some big, giant, grassy swamps that I'm sure are absolutely full of mice. So, you know, their mice are probably jumping in and swimming across to get to the other side of the river all night long. And, you know, the trout just kind of they're opportunistic, and they see that they're going to eat it. But it's a pattern. I mean, it's enough of a pattern that guys intentionally throw flies that look like a mouse. So, but then the other crazy part about trout is, like, they get on, like you said, like a hatch of some sort, and it's like they won't touch anything unless it's about this long and tied on a 14-inch hook, you know. So they can be real targeted on what they're eating. Brian says, caught a brookie on Chippewa River. Would never have thought would find trout. This river is known for game fish, suckers, and carp. Yeah. My guess is that was either really early in the spring or late in the fall. Typically, those big rivers hold trout in the wintertime, and then they start to move up the smaller feeder creeks in the summertime to kind of stay with that cooler water. Like you said, I don't think they would live in the Chippewa all year because it's so warm. But in the spring, when the water temps cool, they have no problem running down into those bigger rivers. And oftentimes they want to, just to get out of the heavy current of some of those smaller streams. And there's a river I fish up here that it's got a lot of browns in it actually in the spring, and they virtually all disappear by, you know, late May, early June, when that water starts warming up. You know, they're up into the cooler streams. But I've caught some really nice ones in there in the early spring. How do you target steelies and browns through the ice? Oh, that is a good question. I will answer that in a second. And Chris Hagnes says, caught a wild tiger trout on a mouse. Yet to get a big brown. You caught a wild tiger on a mouse. Oh, that's interesting. And pretty effective on big rainbows in Alaska. That would be fun. I can only imagine the take on a big rainbow hitting a mouse fly. That would be pretty sick. Catching Big TV says, sup, how's it going? We're talking trout right now. I don't know if you trout fish, but let us know what your favorite live bait is and what your favorite artificial is. So Steelies and Browns through the ice. That's coming up before too long, and I am addicted to targeting trout through the ice. It's my favorite thing to do. I mainly target them on Lake Superior through the ice, and I mainly target browns and splake, actually. The steelhead are very difficult to nail down on Lake Superior. They're the only time you can really even target them on purpose is late ice at the river mouths, as they're starting to stage to move up to spawn in the spring. And, guys catch them on spawn, and stuff like that. But when I'm fishing splake and browns through the ice, my number one tactic to catch them is a live shiner on a jaw jacker. That is, I've caught more trout on that setup than everything else combined by far. And there's a couple tricks to it. Number one, I always leave a long leader between my weight and my minnow. So I'm talking like 4 feet sometimes between where my weight is and my minnow. And the reason I do that is when a trout swims up to my shiner, I want that shiner to be able to swim up and away from that trout as far as possible. Because it's just like when you're jigging, trout want to chase the bait. They want to chase it down. They want it to swim away from them when they get close to it. If it just sits there and it's stuck on a short lead and it's just wiggling, a lot of times they won't touch it because they're like, wait a minute, a smelt or whatever is going to run away from me when I get close. Why isn't this thing? And they don't have that killer instinct to go crush it as it tries to get away. So a long lead, light line, 6-pound test leader, and a jaw jacker set just right with the drag set right. That's by far my number one rig for trout through the ice. And secondary, I would say a Eurotackle T-flasher has probably accounted for more trout than any other spoon for me. And the reason I use those on Lake Superior is they're tungsten, so they fish super heavy. You got a lot of current up there on Lake Superior, and when you're using a flasher, the current will push your bait so far over that you can't see it on the flasher a lot of times. So that's why I really like those tungsten T-flashers to stay more vertical. And they've got a really good finish on them and a feather treble. And I typically tip them with a minnow head. And then, like I said, when I see a mark on my sonar, I'm going to bring that bait above it and then keep going and make them chase it up. That's basically all there is to it. Do you fish the shiner a foot off the bottom? No. Only if I'm on whitefish, and I've caught a lot of whitefish on jaw jackers too. If it's a lot of whitefish and they're tight to bottom, I'll fish it a foot off the bottom. But even for browns, 5 feet off the bottom is about as tight to bottom as I'll go. The reason is if you watch browns, and browns are a little bit more bottom oriented than other trout, but even they are still pelagic fish basically. And they're almost always cruising way up off the bottom, especially in Lake Superior. A lot of these smelt and shiner schools are nowhere near the bottom, and the trout don't tend to hug bottom very often. The whitefish will, but they'll also come up from the bottom to hit, a shiner that's 8 feet off the bottom. So I tend to stagger my lines. I start with 2 feet off the bottom and maybe a 5 foot off the bottom, maybe a halfway down the water column. And then if there's a lot of cohos around when I'm ice fishing, I'll tend to run one about 10 feet under the ice and see if there's any cohos around. So I like to spread my lines out until we start marking fish and getting bites. Because sometimes you just find that magic depth where, like you're fishing 60 feet of water and you find all the fish are 20 feet down. It happens all the time. And sometimes they're right on the bottom. I've had days where I had to keep my bait within 2 feet of the bottom or I wasn't getting bit. So size hook, I'm usually using 6s or 8s. So real small. And again, mainly because I want that minnow to be able to swim freely. I don't want a big hook weighting it down, and I don't want the trout seeing the hook either. And I've landed some pretty big stinking trout on tiny hooks and light line. So what part of Superior fishing out of? I was guided out of Bayfield going back around the 3rd week in February. Okay. Yeah, I'm fishing the Shawamigan Bay, Apostle Islands, that area. There isn't really a whole lot of options up there for places to go most years because Lake Superior is such a big lake. It just doesn't freeze over enough to be safe many other places. So that tends to concentrate a lot of the ice fishing right in that area. And it's never safe even there. I mean, it's a dangerous place to fish, and you have to be prepared for that. You have to know what you're doing. And be prepared to go through, have float suit, ice picks, chisel ahead if it's early ice, there's just a lot of precautions you got to make. And you have to know the ice on that lake because it moves, it shifts, it changes, it breaks up, it refreezes, it opens cracks, closes cracks. It's not a place for beginners, that's for sure. Any other questions on trout or any other? I've got a few minutes left here. In a couple minutes, actually, I'm going to announce a giveaway too that we're doing on the Instagram page for YouTube, actually. And the reason I'm doing it through Instagram is just because it's just easier to post stuff on Instagram than YouTube. So, what size? So, oh yeah, we went over that. Have I tried filling a night crawler up with air? Yeah, we've done that for walleyes. I've never done it for trout. Kind of that Lindy rigging thing, instead of a floating jig head, we'd inject them with some air so they'd float up off the bottom. And we'd put them on a Lindy rig and drag them around, and that does work pretty well. Musky Junkie, how's it going? He's usually here a little earlier. How's the fishing been over your way this week? My buddies didn't show up tonight. They all had stuff going on, so we've just been talking trout fishing mainly here. It's been some good discussion, though. Lots of interesting stuff. All right, so giveaway. The giveaway is basically I'm teaming up with man, I'm blanking right now. Well, I'm teaming up with Virtual Angling, and we're gonna go basically do a giveaway of one of their memberships to Virtual Angling's app. Musky Junkie's back to hunting. Okay, I think a lot of guys are back to hunting. So, anyway, Virtual Angling, they've got an awesome app. Tons and tons of updated information all the time. They're always updating new videos, new tips. I think for ice season, it's going to be real key coming up. And basically, we're giving away a membership. The memberships are $84 a year. So it's a pretty good value that we're giving away. And all you got to do is comment on any one of my videos on YouTube. So any video on the Hooked Up Wisconsin YouTube channel, leave a comment, screenshot it, and message me on Instagram, Hooked Up Wisconsin. Links in the bio here. Just mention that, or take a screenshot of that comment, and then download the Virtual Angling app and take a screenshot of the front page. Send that to me, and you'll be entered in the giveaway. And then if you go back to my original Instagram post, you can tag people there and get another entry. So check that out. That's going for 1 week. So we'll do the drawing next week on the live here. And for you guys that just joined, I'll go over it one more time. Giveaway for virtual angling membership for 1 year. It's $84 value, and we're giving that away. Basically, the rules are you have to message me a screenshot of any comment you leave on a Hooked Up Wisconsin YouTube video. Just screenshot that comment and message it to me on Instagram at Hooked Up Wisconsin, and then screenshot the front page of the virtual angling app, and you can win membership. So really cool stuff. And even if you don't enter, go check out Virtual Angling, download the app. They got a bunch of free stuff on there. So the membership just gives you access to all the benefits of that app. So really cool. I don't know if you guys know Nicole Stone. She's kind of involved with that app and gathering content. And then Jason Mitchell out in North Dakota, he's also creating content for it. He helped develop it with Nicole. A couple really good ice fisher anglers there. Lots of knowledge. They've got, pros leaving tips, and basically every single week they've got some awesome stuff on there. So go check it out. Anything else you guys are doing? We can talk hunting too, if you guys have some hunting going on. I am trying to fish more this fall than I have, so I've kind of backed off some of the hunting, but basically I'm just trying to hit the hunting when it's good. So I'm duck hunting on those cold fronts and really good days, and then fishing on the nicer days. And then early November here, I will probably be sitting in my bow stand. I was scouting some stuff out today, putting some cameras out, but I'm probably mainly going to hunt the rut this year. I just don't have time to early season hunt or mid-season. And my son's not bow hunting yet, so I don't feel like I have to get him out. He likes to duck hunt anyway. So we'll be bow hunting in November. And then, of course, the Wisconsin rifle season is like a holiday for everybody here. So I've taken that week off ever since I can remember. Ever since I was a little kid, we've always taken Thanksgiving week off, and we always hunt, pretty much every day. Although I do duck hunt during the last 2 days of deer season a lot of times, so that Monday and Tuesday we'll duck hunt and then deer hunt the rest of the week. And if there's ice, you better believe I'll be ice fishing Thanksgiving week too. Sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. This time of year, that time of year, late November can be real finicky. I mean, some years we've had 70-degree weather that week, and other years it's been below zero, and we've had ice and we've been ice fishing. So I'm hoping for the latter. I like that early ice stuff, so that's what I'm shooting for. But you just got to roll with whatever you get. What's the earliest you guys have ever ice fished? The earliest I've ever been on the ice is November 8th. And that was, I think, 3 years ago. We had just this insane cold front the first week of November. And we actually had 4 inches of ice on the smaller ponds and lakes around here by November 8th. And I mean, I wasn't even on 2 inches of ice. I was on 4 on the 8th. I wouldn't mind if that happened again. Basically 2 weeks of ice fishing before deer season. Oh, that was awesome. I would not mind that one bit. But typically, I would say on a typical year, we don't get fishable ice until the last week in November. So usually, opening day of deer season, third weekend in November, we don't have fishable ice many places at all, but by the end of that week, towards the end of the deer season, a lot of times you can get on. I'd say that's pretty average for this area, which is earlier than a lot of parts of the country. A lot of places down south, like in Illinois, southern Wisconsin, they might only get a couple weeks of ice fishing every year in mid-January, and that's it. So I consider us fortunate to get, if we get half of November and we get into April, that's a long ice season, and it happens fairly often. So that's why we're so into it up here. I mean, that's all there is to do for 5 or 6 months out of the year, unless you're into snowmobiling or skiing. So it's definitely a long ice season up here. Yeah, I'm with you on fishing first ice. Yep. And it can be really good, but it also can be really tough. Like last year, our early ice season, I know some people had a lot of success, but our ice season was absolute crap. It was just terrible. Like we went out 3 or 4 times and we just could not get on any numbers of fish. We caught a few here and there, but I think it was because there was only like 2.5, 3 inches of ice, and it was clear ice, and there was no snow on it. And I think the fish were just really spooky. They were just kind of running away. They were seeing us, hearing us, and as soon as we got snow, basically, and it deadened our footsteps, all of a sudden we started catching fish like immediately. So I'm not sure if that was the reason, but it sure did seem to make a difference last year when we got that first snow and got a little bit of cover on the ice. But, on the other hand, I've had years where we fished on clear ice, 2.5, 3 inches of just absolute clear ice and just crushed the fish. So I'm not sure what it was with last year, but we just didn't do super great early. Hopefully this year it'll be different. Hopefully we can start smashing them right away. And I've got a lot of fun stuff to try this year. I've got a couple different cameras. I'm going to be hopefully getting a lot of good underwater video this year. That's my goal. I'm going to set up cameras on a couple set lines this year and kind of video tip-ups, video jaw jackers, and what happens underwater when a fish stalks that minnow, and what happens on a jaw jacker when a fish hits it. I want to see kind of how long it takes that jaw jacker to go off, where the minnow is positioned in the fish's mouth, how many misses happen and what they're caused by. I've figured out quite a few things to up my odds on jaw jackers as far as hooking fish, and it'd be nice to see some actual footage of what, of if my theories are correct. But yeah, it'll be fun to get some more video this year. We got a lot of clear lakes up here, so it's pretty easy to get some good footage underwater. But I'll tell you guys one trick right now to catching more fish on jaw jackers. Or anytime you're hooking a minnow on a single hook, that's going to be on some sort of set line, whether it's a bobber or a tip up. If you're using a single hook, I'm going to just use this remote as an example, but say this is my minnow, right? This is the head of the minnow. A lot of guys, they take their hook and they hook it behind the dorsal fin sideways, right? So they hook it like this. Well, the problem with that is that minnow is going to start swimming, and what can happen is that hook can rotate down, and actually the hook point can get covered up by the minnow itself and stop the bite, or stop the hook from penetrating the fish's mouth. So what you want to do on that minnow is you want to put the point of the hook in behind the dorsal and then run it parallel to the spine, above the spine, and then hook it back like this. So it can't spin either way. It's not going to spin forward. It's not going to spin back. It's just going to stick straight up. That way, when that fish eats the minnow head first, that hook's going to be right in position to hook it, and it's not going to fold under the minnow and stick the minnow, because that used to happen on our jaw jackers quite a bit. We'd pull them up and the minnow would be like bent in half and impaled on the hook, and the fish would be gone. So that's kind of one thing I learned, is just to skin hook that minnow parallel to the minnow and then point the hook back so that minnow's swimming down like this and it can't turn and hook the minnow itself. So there's a little tip for you. Hopefully that helps. Or you can use a treble hook. You know, I just prefer to use single hooks just because it's less obtrusive and less obvious to the fish. You know, and I've had really good luck when you hook the minnow that way. If you don't hook the minnow that way, you're gonna struggle. You're gonna miss a lot of fish, and I can only tell you that because I used to hook them that way myself, and it did not go well. Let me put it that way. Do I think color of hook matters? It matters some, and I haven't really dialed in a pattern on hook color as far as like what really, if it really makes a huge difference. But I've always had good luck with red hooks. You know, red hooks they work. They don't tend to spook fish. You know, I've tried some of the bright colored hooks like the chartreuse and pink and orange, and I've caught fish on them. You know, those work too, especially if you got a little dingier water. You know, it can make a difference. Silver hooks work. Black hooks work. You know, there's not a ton of science as far as I'm concerned, as far as the color goes. Just use what works. That's all I can say. Thanks for the tip on minnow hooking technique. Never heard that before. Yeah, no problem. I've got a lot of stuff on YouTube, on the YouTube channel about, you know, some tips on how to hook minnows and stuff. I have one about jigs and 5 different ways to hook jigs on, hook a minnow on a jig, and that's one of the ways. And I kind of explain it further in that video. So if you want to check that out, that's on the channel. But I'm going to be doing a lot more tips like this on the YouTube channel over the winter too. I'll also be submitting some exclusive tips to virtual angling too. So that's the only place you're going to see some of them. And yeah, I feel those neon hooks aren't as sticky as traditional black hooks. Yeah, could be. They have that extra coating on them, you know. The gamakatsus, of course, like I know you're talking about, the gamakatsus do leave off the coating on the end of their hooks. So they coat all the way around, like halfway back up the bend, but then the tip and the barb are not dipped. So, you know, I think the point is just as sharp on those hooks as it would be on a black gamakatsu, but the shank does have a little bit more coating on it. So, and then some of the cheaper brand hooks that are colored, they got junk all over them. They get junk stuck up in the behind the barb, and they get paint on the tip, and you know, you don't want that. You definitely don't want that. Muskie Junkie says, I think you're right about steel leaders on pike. I think muskies don't care, but believe clear fluoro gets a bite. Yeah, I agree. Well, you probably saw some of my content earlier this week and today. I've been posting about fluorocarbon, and what it comes down to for pike is just, you know, it's a risk reward. And with fluoro, you're going to get more bites. I have no doubt about that. You're going to get more bites on fluoro. Are you going to get bit off once in a while? Yes. But the amount of bites you get versus, you know, getting bit off every now and then, to me, is worth the risk. I'd rather get the bites and deal with it. And like I said, I'm using a lot smaller hooks for pike than a lot of people. And when you use small hooks, that hook can pull all the way to the edge of the pike's mouth before it sticks them. If you're using those big giant trebles, way back in there, that hook point's going to stick them, and the teeth are going to be grinding on the line, and you're going to have a lot less luck with bite offs using bigger hooks too. It's funny, like the jaw jackers, I'll fish jaw jackers with shiners or small fat heads on them. Almost never get bit off by a pike on 6-pound tests because I have a number 6 or number 8 octopus hook. It's going to slide all the way out to the edge of the pike's mouth and hook him in the corner of the mouth almost every time. because they're going to hit it and they're going to be facing away. That line's going to pull right here, wham. And very rarely do they get their teeth on the line on a jaw jacker. Almost never. It's crazy how, I mean, if I hook a big pike on a jaw jacker on 6-pound fluoro, there's a very good likelihood I'm going to land it, unless it gets in, some nasty cover or something like that. Chris says they don't flex the same or something. They work, but a little different in the hand. He's talking about the Gamakatsu. Yeah, maybe they have to use a different material to get the paint to stick. That could be a different metal or a different coating on them. That's possible. Yeah, there's Kyle just hopped on. He was getting ready for a guide trip earlier. He said he wouldn't be able to join, but how's it going, Kyle? How's the fishing been for you? You got any muskies in the boat this week? I would guess with these cold fronts rolling through, it's got to be heating up on the muskie front. Sucker time this time of year. A lot of guys fishing big suckers. Early ice crappie tips. In Duluth area, hoping to target them in November, December before inland lake trout opens. Yeah, early ice crappies. I've had really good luck on the Clear Lakes by me anyway, fishing 15 to 20 foot hard bottom points and bars and humps. And they'll usually be suspended on them 3-4 feet off the bottom. And that seems to be the zone that they like first ice. You can get them in the weeds sometimes, but I've had much better luck with early ice crappies just off the weeds in that first basin area, in that 15 to 22 feet maybe. I don't tend to catch them out in the deep basin right away. Sometimes yes, but most of my early ice crappie fishing is done in that first basin, what I call the first basin. So it's like just off the first weed line, you've got that drop, and then it flattens out. And that's typically where I'm going to catch them. And a lot of times it's between 15 and 20 feet, early ice. Once the winter wears on, you're going to see those crappies start to move out to the basin and suspend even more, sometimes halfway down the water column, even in like 30 feet of water. I don't tend to see them like that a lot super early, but they can be found there. That's for sure. And then in your shallow or basin lakes or your stained lakes, they're going to be up in the weed lines a lot of times, or in scattered weed pockets and stuff like that. Or if there's like a lake that's mainly shallow and weedy, and it's got like one hole, that's a really good spot to find crappies concentrated right around the edges of that hole. They'll stack up in crazy numbers on some lakes like that. Some of those little pothole lakes that have huge shallow flats and then just one deep area. I mean, you can get thousands of crappies pushed into those spots early ice. Sorensen Fishing said fishing's been good. That's good. Brett McComas, how you doing, Brett? Been some fun stuff to cover on the old walleye front with all the lead weight, the lead weight news. I've been reading your Target Walleye newsletters, and there's been some interesting stuff going on in the tournament fishing world for sure. So I guess I'm sure you guys have all heard about that whole scenario where they found the two guys were cheating, putting weights in their walleyes on Lake Erie there. So it sounds like, from what I heard now, they actually got their boat confiscated, and they're being charged with grand theft, is what it sounds like. And that's pretty serious stuff. I mean, they're not messing around with these guys. I mean, they were fixing to steal a lot of money, and probably had stolen a lot of money already by fishing illegally, entering fish illegally, weighted fish. And it's not looking good for those guys right now. Muskie Junkie says 3 felonies. Yeah, not going to be a good time for those boys. They're going to have some real trouble on their hands now. I mean, that was they don't mess around when there's that much money on the line. I don't care what sport it is or whatever. Like, if you're trying to rip off people hardcore like that and flat out cheat, you're gonna end up in some serious trouble, and you should. I mean, that was pretty unbelievable. I mean, literally the whole world was shocked by that. It made world news, and it wasn't just, like I said last week, it wasn't just because it happened. It was because of the way it happened, with it basically being videoed and put on social media almost instantly, and you had raw reactions from the crowd of guys around him, and it was just it was pretty fascinating to watch the stuff go down that fast. It was pretty interesting. I watched the interview on the Ike show, Ike Live, Mike Iaconelli's show. They interviewed Jason, the tournament director for that trail, and it was a pretty fascinating story. I would encourage you guys to check that interview out, because it was just like everything came to a head just perfectly for things to blow up, because everything was on the line. That tournament, everything was on the line. The season was on the line. That tournament was on the line. It was the last weigh-in of the tournament, and these two guys were the last two to weigh in because they were the favorites. They were the head, and that's kind of how they do it in bass too. They hype it up, and they keep the front runners till the very end to make it suspenseful. So it's like everybody just focused on this final weigh-in, and then it was just so blatantly over the top heavy for the size fish that they weighed in, that everybody was like, what? Wait a minute. That's just not right, So then Jason said, wow, we're gonna examine those. And he picked them up, and he was actually checking for mushiness, like to see if they had frozen them, or hauled them in from somewhere else, or caught them earlier and thawed them out. But when he picked them up, he felt those hard weights in their stomachs, and then he said, "Get me a knife," and it just happened like that. And you can imagine how those guys' stomachs just churned into knots instantly. I mean, they knew they were toast, and the one of them ran away, and the other one just froze solid, couldn't even think, just stood there with his mouth open like, can't believe this just happened. Oh, you want to almost feel bad for the guys, but on the other hand, you can't really feel bad for them, because they had it coming 100%. They had it coming. Yeah, not just the money, but the time they robbed from the other competitors. Yeah, if you fish walleye tournaments like that, on that scale, and that that kind of that size of tournament where there's that much money on the line, you're fishing a lot. You're taking time away from your family. You're taking time away from work. You're putting money into your boat and your electronics, and you're working your butt off to try and win that thing, and you're just not expecting somebody to just flat out steal and cheat like that. You're just not expecting it. You're working your tail off to make this happen, and sacrificing stuff that you probably have reservations about even sacrificing. And these guys just come in and totally slam it in your face. It's just crazy. It was the most beautiful thing ever from the perspective of the good guys. Yeah. I love the conviction of the good guys being pissed off. Cheaters lucky they got out alive. Yeah. They are. It shows, that a lot of the guys did have integrity, and they let the law do their job, and they didn't didn't try and step in there and get physical with the guys and beat them up. Although I'm sure a lot of them were about that close. And I think it was to Jason's credit that he told them not to touch them. You know, he was trying to do the right thing there, and I think that was smart. Because then, even if they had touched him, at least he couldn't claim responsibility for it. But yeah, Lost Malure says those poor wives. Yeah, can you imagine the disappointment? Like, any of you guys who are married, can you imagine if you had done something that low and that snaky, and then it got on the world news? Imagine what your wife would think of you if you flat out cheated hundreds of thousands of dollars from people in a fishing tournament, and then it got exposed, and your wife saw it on the news and saw your face everywhere she went and popping up in her news feed. I mean, it would not be pretty. It would not be pretty. Yeah. And that's why most people don't live like that, because the consequences are not good. When you get caught, it can get real ugly real fast, which it should. So, hey, at least our justice system's working, it sounds like. So, all right, guys, I think I'm going to wrap it up here for tonight. But, yeah, this is kind of different live. I didn't have any guests tonight, but thank you guys for hopping in and commenting and giving me some stuff to talk about it. I appreciate that. And I like to hear from you guys too. I love hearing where you're fishing, what you're using. You know, you might learn some stuff from me, but I'm also learning some stuff from you guys too. So, you know, there's a couple of tips tonight from you guys that I might end up trying myself. I like that peanut fly on the back of the crankbait. That's a good one. It's like a skirted crankbait, basically. So, you know, little stuff like that sometimes makes all the difference. And it's all a big puzzle, and we're all just trying to figure out the pieces, and the pieces are always changing every day. So that's why we all love to fish. But yeah, good luck, you guys, this fall here. Hopefully you can continue hunting and fishing through the fall, and it won't be long here. We'll be hitting the early ice, and that is my favorite season of the year. And I know it's a lot of years too, so we're going to definitely keep doing these lives throughout the winter. Watch for a lot more videos on my YouTube channel too, ice fishing videos this year. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it. You all have a good night. Good luck.